Okay, this is going into two playlists, both how to increase your harmonic vocabulary as a composer and also chromatic modulation. I have a course on basic chromatic harmony that you could find hundreds of examples on in the description and also pasted right here for a second. So I have two guys up here in the picture, Wagner and Louis Armstrong, okay? Well, one's considered a classical composer, one's considered a jazz musician. What do they have in common? They both use dominant chains for one, as part of their harmonic vocabulary. So if you start to recognize dominant chains, sometimes you'll see them in the guy on the left's music, sometimes you'll see it on the guy on the right's music. So in the chromatic modulation series, we started with the diminished chord, and I'll leave that in the description, and all the possible resolutions it can have. 8 possible resolutions for one. However, I didn't start with dominant chords because you could just simply jump to a dominant chord from anywhere and resolve. That's instantaneous chromatic modulation. That's easy to do. So literally, that's instantaneous chromatic modulation, and you don't even need a video on that. You could just jump to any dominant chord. So dominant chains only work in kind of counterclockwise circle of fifth directions. And you must know how they resolve as well. So natural sounding flow, counterclockwise. Dance of the Sugar Plum Fairy does that, for instance. Go in the opposite direction. Listen to how the flow just kind of stops. Interesting effect, but the flow is just not as natural sounding. So before we jump into modulation with dominant chains, we're first gonna, just showing that it's possible. I used a dominant chain in that sequence. First, we want to practice just simple harmonic upkeep of dominant chains. So a dominant chain's in the circle of fifth direction counterclockwise. We would go to F7, B flat 7, E flat 7, A flat 7, D flat 7, kind of the buffer zone, F sharp 7, B7, E7, A7, D7, G7, and you could resolve it or keep going. You might do the same exercise because you don't need the 5th and a 7th chord like this. You might just leave the 5th out and then practice it that way without the 5th on every other chord. Also practice writing them out like I did here for this video. So you don't need the 5th. Now what I would do now is start on the 3rd degree and create a harmonic sequence using the circle of fifths and dominant chords again. In this case, the 3rd is going to go to the 7th of the next chord. 7th, okay? 3rd, 7th, 3rd, 7th. And just the same scheme all the way back to C. I'm not writing out the inversions. You should know this stuff. If you don't, I would suggest learning. You might create a way to end it. Technically, we're not modulating right now. We're just chaining. So under the next, we're going to leave out the 5th up top. And when we move to a common tone, we're just going to keep it. So the 5th will move to the F, for instance, and the F is in B flat. And then you could resolve or not resolve, or you could keep doing the same exercise going downwards, as it will take you in a circle. So in the next one, I'm resolving from a 7th chord to a major triad. So C dominant go to F, B flat dominant go to E flat. This is knowing the resolutions. I'm still sticking this in the dominant chain area. Okay, here's the exercise. You notice there's only 3 notes. You notice doing things voiced like this creates harmonic sequential patterns. Now I would take the same process and resolve to a minor chord instead. This is going to help with our modulation later. Okay? 7th, 3rd, 7th, 3rd, 7th, 3rd. And just to break out. So that's all we want to do right now, is make sure we can get through a dominant chain with just the basic dominant 7th chord. You could always turn these into extensions later. And this is what's interesting about dominant chains. No matter what type you use, they still work. Let me change it to a different dominant type scenario. Do the same exact pattern, but different dominant type. Still works. It still works, and dominant chains are a big factor on a lot of styles of music. That's why I put those two people up there. It's not the only factor, and it's not the only thing they ever use is circle of fifth movement. Sometimes there's stuff like Dorian going on, or in the case of Wagner, he may not use a dominant chain at all in one piece. But dominant chains can be used right in the middle of chromatic harmony to shift from one tonal center rapidly to another remote tonal center. As I did earlier as a demonstration to show that we're going to use some of that with the stuff we've already learned. And this is also harmonic upkeep at the same time. You should know how to make a dominant chain with basic dominant chords.